What is your idea of the perfect Christmas? You know, if everything went exactly as you planned it, what would that look like to you? If all the food you cooked turned out well and nothing burned, if everyone behaved themselves properly, if everything just went like you thought it would go, what would that look like for you, for the perfect Christmas? Well, I feel like it's my job as pastor to tell you that's not going to happen. That there's no such thing as a perfect Christmas. That despite all the planning that we do for Christmas, things still go wrong, and there's nothing we can do to avoid that. You know, the question more becomes, how do we respond when something goes wrong? And so what I propose this morning is that the next time one of your plans goes awry or something doesn't meet your expectations, you respond with laughter, with humor. Because this time of year, it's easy to respond with grouchiness, with irritability, cynicism, anger. I mean, those are the ways that it's easy to respond because there's so much going on. But the next time something doesn't go like you planned, and I guarantee it'll be this week, if not today, then try to respond with laughter, with humor, to see still the joy in this season. In fact, I have an exercise to help with that. It's an exercise that I do every year with you guys, mostly because I think I really enjoy it, and I make you do it as well. But I find the funniest family Christmas cards that don't go as planned to show you. And it's an exercise to say, okay, those families had an idea of what they thought was going to work well, and then didn't happen, and it went astray, and yet they found humor in it. So much so that they posted them online because they thought they were so funny. And so let this be an exercise for us that when things don't go right, we can laugh about them. Okay, here's the first one. We won't show you yet, but you can probably relate to it because it's on a beach, maybe even the Florida beach, and you can tell that the parents put in a lot of work to create the setting. They even brought some evergreen firs and laid them all out, so they thought about the setting. Apparently, they just didn't think about nap time. So close, so close. I mean, that would have been a really nice shot. But you can tell that kid thought, nope, you've taken too long. I'm out. We can't do this anymore. And he is taking a nap right there on the beach. All right, this next one, I think of those mall Santas, and I really feel for them. They have a challenging job, and you know they're probably just picking up extra hours, during the busy holiday season. But what do they do when kids don't at all cooperate? What would you do if you're in their shoes? He's up there just looking, going, I don't know what to do with this. I'm not sure how to respond. And I wonder who took that picture. I mean, is that the family thinking it's funny and is going to take the picture? Is it someone standing in line, seeing this all occur and just snapping away? But that's what they use, joy and peace. There you go. All right. You'll be able to relate to this next one if you have a large family. And if you have a lot of siblings and you think to yourself, 3 out of 4 ain't bad. I don't know what was said or done to that child, but he is not happy. He's channeling the Grinch right there, where everyone else is doing the best they can to say, yes, we're a happy family. Look at us. Look at us. All right, last one. If you have ever gotten into a fight with your brother or sister at an inopportune time, you will be able to relate to this last family photo. Looking at the mother's eyes, you just see fear. Fear, possibly some anger, a lot of surprise, but that picture is not at all going how they would expect. So I wonder, is any of this reminiscent for you already? Have you gotten into a point of your Christmas preparations where you said, well, that didn't go like I thought it would? That has not gone to plan. Can you relate to the picture of siblings fighting? This time of year, we all want the perfect Christmas. We want things to work perfectly. But we also need to realize that mistakes will happen, and sometimes reality won't meet the expectations of what we hope will occur. In fact, we're going to study this morning how to meet God within the failed expectations and messy relationships that we all are a part of this Christmas season. After all, that is how the first Christmas occurred, with Mary and Joseph. I mean, that first Christmas did not go at all how they expected it to go or hoped it would go. I mean, think about it. Think about it. This is Mary and Joseph, and they're going to give birth to their very first child. What expectations do you think they had going into that? What were their hopes for how that all might take place? It became a lot more challenging than I bet they ever expected. And the expectations they had for how that would all occur were not met. And so what we're going to study this morning is how did they still meet God even in the midst of this crazy time of having their firstborn son? So it begins in Luke. We continue Luke's story. Now we're in chapter 2, verse 1. It begins in this way. At that time, the Roman Emperor, Augustus, decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. This was the first census taken when Quirinius was governor of Syria. All returned to their own ancestral towns to register for this census. So you might be asking, what is the point of a census? Why would you have a census take place? And in this time period in Rome, they simply wanted to count their people. They wanted to know how many people are living in this Roman province right now. And census taking is not unusual. Most major countries around the world will have a census from time to time. Our own country has a census. About every 10 years, they will have a major census to count all the people, to find out who is all living in America at this time. And they do that, and they get the results to say, okay, now we know, how many representatives to the House of Representatives you get, and then you have all the demographic data that you can study. Census data is important for our country, and in Rome, it was important as well. But in Rome, it was important for different reasons. I mean, they didn't have a House of Representatives. They didn't really care about that. No, Rome really had two reasons for holding a census. The first was to find out who is eligible for the military. Who among my people in Rome is eligible to join the army if we really needed them, if we had a conflict, if someone was going to go invade us, or if we wanted to go invade someone else, we need to know how many people are eligible for military service. So that was one of the first reasons for a census in Rome in this time period. But that did not affect Mary and Joseph. Jewish people were exempt from military service during this time. And so that wasn't the reason they were affected by the census. No, the second reason is why they were affected. Taxes. Can't get out of taxes. Not now and not 2,000 years ago. You see, Rome wanted to know how many people living in our country should be paying us taxes. And so they issued a decree. And they said, everyone, go back to your hometown. Go back to where you ancestrally are from and register so that we know you are living in Rome and that we can tax you at some point. So this is why Mary and Joseph, because of the census, said, okay, we're going to go return to where Joseph's family is from. Now, Joseph's family, he's descended from King David. So if you remember the David series we did this fall, he's descended from David, whose hometown was Bethlehem. And so they had to go return to Bethlehem, which is where our story continues. In verse 4, it says, and because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee, and he took with him Mary, to whom he was engaged, who was now expecting a child. So we all know that Mary and Joseph went from Bethlehem to Nazareth. Nazareth to Bethlehem. That's not news to anybody. But we often overlook what kind of journey that actually was. And so I'd like to highlight three things that journey actually entailed that we miss with a simple reading of Scripture. And we'll get them on the screen for you as we go. But the first is this. If you're going to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem, that was a long journey. That was about 85 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And if you're living in a time period with no cars, with no transit, then your form of transportation are your 2 feet, maybe a donkey, but you're walking from Nazareth to Bethlehem, those 85 miles. People think that in this time period, because that's how you got around places, that you could average about 20 miles a day. That was the average amount of people that you could walk. My guess is that would change if you're 9 months pregnant. I mean, I can't imagine Mary walking 20 miles a day to make that long journey. And so what would normally be a 4 to 5 day journey is probably more like a 6 or 7 day journey, depending on how that's going. And so Mary and Joseph have to do this long trek with Mary, 9 months pregnant, about to give birth, a long journey all the way to Bethlehem. That's the first reason that this would have been a challenging journey for them. The second is thinking about the time of year it took place. It took place most likely in the winter. And I know, being from Florida, we think, oh, winter, that's not so bad. That's probably a nice time to take a nice journey. But in the Middle East, you actually get yourself some winters. In fact, Dr. James L. Strange, he is a professor of New Testament and biblical archaeology at the University of South Florida. He researched this a bit, and here's what he said about that season in the Middle East. We'll get on the screen. He said, the trip through the Judean desert would have taken place during the winter when it's in the 30s during the day and rains like heck. It's nasty, miserable, and at night it would be freezing. Can you imagine doing that for a week? Walking all day when it's that cold, and if it is their rainy season, then walking through the cold rain? I mean, even if you're Mary and you do have a donkey to sit on, you're still enduring the elements that entire journey, that entire week. That's the second reason why it would have been a challenging journey. And the third is this. This was not a safe journey to take place in. No, in this time period, if you got outside the major kind of city areas to the outskirts, then there were bands of robbers and thieves that would just wait to prey on travelers. I mean, you remember, they went through the region of Samaria, or they tried to avoid the region of Samaria to make their journey longer, because you remember the story of the Good Samaritan. This is what happens when people would walk through that area, and then robbers would come and beat you up and take your stuff. That was a real threat for the journey that they had to make. Not only that, but there's wildlife in these areas. Wildlife including lions and bears. How do you think Joseph felt when he's thinking, I need to do this journey with my very pregnant, soon-to-be wife, and there's all of these threats that lie ahead of me? I mean, how stressed would he have to have been to think about undertaking that journey? It was a long journey, it was a cold journey, and it was not a safe journey. And yet this is the journey that Mary and Joseph took to bring Jesus into the world. I have this picture in my head of Joseph making that journey going, I'm doing all this to pay taxes? That's why I'm doing all this? I think he was probably pretty frustrated. But how do you think they felt when they arrived finally in Bethlehem? Do you think they were bone tired? Do you think they were very cold? Do you think they were kind of scared, not really knowing anyone and knowing that Mary was pretty close to giving birth? Like, how did they feel when they finally arrived? And then what would go through your head when you realize you have arrived at your destination and you have no place to stay? That you don't know anyone well enough to stay with them? That any inn you go to is already full because everyone's come for the census? I mean, if you're Mary, if you're Joseph, what would be going through your head in those moments? I think what was going through their head was, this is not how we would have planned this. This does not meet our expectations for our firstborn son coming into the world. I would guess that they would want to be around family, that they'd want to be in their hometown when Jesus was finally born. And yet, on the very first Christmas, none of those expectations became a reality. Our scripture continues in verse 6. It says this, and while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. And she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no lodging available for them. What a humble beginning to the birth of the Savior of the world. When I think of when we first brought my daughter Zoe home, when she was a newborn baby, she's 5 now, so 5 years ago, I remember the long list of things I thought we needed to be ready for a baby, right? The essential things that you need, and essentials in quotes because it's such a long list. And then you actually have the child and you go, okay, I don't need most of this. But when we had a baby registry, we thought, okay, we need the Bob stroller, right? With the really big tires that you can go off-roading if you want to. We've got to have that. And we've got to have the right car seat, the car seat that's up to all the new government standards that come out every single week to make sure they're safe enough. We've got to have the right crib, the crib so down the line it can convert into a toddler bed when they're ready for that. You've got to have a whole set of bottles, all BPA free, of course. I mean, your list was so long for bringing a newborn child into the world. And Mary and Joseph had none of these things. Mary and Joseph were in a strange town where they didn't know anybody. They were in a stable, most likely filled with donkeys and sheep. And their crib for Jesus was actually a manger, which is an animal feeding trough. That was Jesus' first crib. None of this met their expectations for how they thought it should happen when you're bringing your first child into the world. And yet on this third Sunday in Advent, I find myself deeply admiring Mary and Joseph and what they went through for Jesus to come into the world and what they experienced on that very first Christmas. I bet it's different from what we think they experienced. I mean, think about the times where you see a nativity scene, whether it's in the front lawn of someone's house or when you see it online. I mean, if you just type in happy nativity, you know what shows up online? It's pictures like this. They all seem so happy, right? They're probably having a great time. And yet that's not reality. Reality is Mary and Joseph were probably cold and tired and scared when Jesus came into the world. That's what the first Christmas was like. But we can learn from them how even though none of their true expectations were met, they still found hope in their son and hope in that season. So I want you to take a moment and think about what are your expectations for the perfect Christmas? I mean, what are you truly hoping will occur in the next week? Perhaps when we compare those to reality, there will be times where you say, that's going to fall short, and that's not really going to work like I hope or think it'll work. I thought of some examples. I mean, when your expectation is a nice family meal, but reality is someone starts talking about politics and everyone cringes and just eats faster and then you hope it gets done quicker. Or maybe your expectation is that everybody loves their Christmas presents. And reality is you swing and miss on one of them and you just keep thinking about that one in the back of your head. Maybe the expectation for you is that your whole family will focus on the true meaning of Christmas. And reality is that they're more focused on what am I getting? When can I open my presents? When is it all about me? Or maybe your expectation is that you'll have a certain person in your life present. And yet reality is that for some reason beyond your control and beyond your circumstances, that person cannot be with you, cannot be present. Our expectations in this next week won't meet reality 100% of the time. But that's why we want to be reminded of Mary and Joseph and their first story. Because it reminds us of the true reality, which is true for each and every one of us, that Christmas is about Jesus coming into the world. And the hope and the love that comes into each and every one of our lives because of Jesus. And so what we really need to focus on and what we really need to hope to accomplish is that the next time you have a failed expectation, you remind yourself of Mary and Joseph. You remind yourself of what they went through for the true meaning of Christmas. Because hopefully that puts everything into perspective. So my hope this Christmas season is that you do have a close to perfect Christmas, but that it's perfect because you remember that Jesus came into the world. And that truly is a perfect Christmas.